Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation. I have to say that after listening to the talks yesterday, for me, the exact timing of when we can call the Yamnaya and pre-Yamnaya got really confused. So I just apologize if I'm not using this correctly, but I'm mainly a paleo-environmentalist and paleoclimatologist, and what my task is to try to provide a background of the climatic changes in this vast region. So let's start it. I'm starting with the 4th millennium BC because the pre-Yamnaya first westward movements took place at the end of this millennium. I think many of you know, and some of the talks included some reference to this, that this is a period of very abrupt and frequent changes. It has been identified by Majewski as a period of rapid climate changes occurring in high latitudes, usually associated with cooling events, and in low latitudes, it's usually associated with repeated aridity that usually lasts for several centuries only. And the background for this is the intertropical convergence zone movement, which retreated during the summer at this time in connection with changes in the solar irradiation in the northern hemisphere, which started to decline around 6,000 years ago. So we talk about the summer insolation. At the same time, the winter insolation in the northern hemisphere increased, and this change resulted in a shift in the climate system, a highly localized environmental responses, and of course the major change was the weakening of the African and Asian monsoon, and that was linked to the cooling summer sea surface temperature, which resulted in a weaker contrast between the landmass and the oceans. On this figure, I highlighted, this is in BP, and sometimes I'm going to talk in BC, sometimes I have to switch to BP, so be careful with that. So this is here about 5,300, 5,500, and what you see here is the alpine glacial advances, and this red line is showing you the ice-rafted debris material in the North Atlantic, which shows a peak here suggesting the advance of the winter ice cover in the North Atlantic, so a period of cooling in northwestern Europe. Along with these changes, we have a very good evidence of hydrological changes in Western Europe. We have less conclusive, less well-studied sites in the eastern part of the continent. What these lake-level reconstructions tell us is that about 3,300, 3,100, so it coincides with the glacial advances, there is a lake level increase event in Lake Constance in Switzerland, and as you see in this graph, you see the lake level advances and retreats, and when we arrive towards the end of the 4th millennium, we see that at least in the Alps we have a drier period followed by a very short lake level increase again, and relatively lower lake levels in the early part of the 3rd millennium. So what I'm trying to do in this presentation is to show how the climatic parameters and how the vegetation cover and composition changed further east of this section in Eastern Europe, from the Carpathian Basin to the Pontic Steppe, in a period between about 3,500 to 2,500 BC, which is the major period of pre-Yamnaya and Yamnaya migration westward. Many predictions can be read in the literature. Anytime when I read Yamnaya-related papers, it's very often I find reasoning of climate change. Most often, what we find is rainfall decline and the movement of the pastoral community related to the the pasture changes to seek for better pastures. But of course, there are many alternative explanations of the Yamnaya migrations. What you can see some examples here. And on this map, we can see this path, which is of my major interest, and their arrival in the Carpathian Basin. And the early sporadic movements, as we saw yesterday, started around 3,300, but the mass movement, as I understood correctly, it starts around probably 2,900 or 3,100 in the region. So those are the very important time periods for us to see what kind of climate change happens in that period. Within the impact project, together with Enikő Steppe and Maria Ramos, we looked for sites in the Carpathians that are bordering the region of the lower Danube area in order to try to reconstruct climate change quantitatively in this area. You see the sampling process on this slide. This is the Buzău area, elevations between 600 and 900. Several lakes are formed in this region. And our major interest was in lipid biomarkers and pollen. Here you see the pollen diagram of Lake Mocearu, which is situated about 700 meters above sea level. And what I just highlighted here is the time around 3,300. This time scale is in Cal BP, when a big change in the local vegetation takes place with the expansion of alder. And alder is associated with swampy soils, inundated soils. So the interpretation of this change was the increase in lake level and flooding of the lakeshore areas. Before the time period, we see a classic, we call them Atlantic forest composition with mixed oak forest, and in this region also Tilia, which is linden, was important. So this is about 5,300. In the same lake, we analyzed the branched GDGTs, and these are lipid biomarkers, lipids that are part of the cell wall of bacteria living either in the lake or in the lake shore. That's why you saw these soil samples we were taking in the field, and their chain length can be used to reconstruct annual mean temperature change. Studies in the northern hemisphere showed that instead of the real annual mean temperature, they rather indicate the mean temperature above freezing, so the temperatures when the daily mean temperature is above zero. And what you see here is that this record does show a gradual decline around, starting around 5,400 years. So if it's in BC, then we are between 3,400 and 2,200. So we do see a change in the annual or above freezing temperatures at this time, which broadly coincides with the beginning of the Yamnaya westward migration, so pre-Yamnaya migration. If we look at the climate characteristics of East Central Europe and Eastern Europe, we have to bear in mind that in this region, as you move to the east, you get higher and higher continentality, which means hot summers and very cold winters. And when we look at the climatic trajectories, we see that these climatic characteristics are strongly connected with oscillations in the North Atlantic, called the North Atlantic Oscillation. I will briefly talk about it. The East Atlantic Oscillation and the Arctic Oscillation. Particularly in the winters, occasional intrusions of Siberian air masses can take place that bring very cold and dry air masses, and this is very well represented by the Arctic Oscillation Index that can be retrieved from the Greenland ice record. Now let's just see one example of these very important climate modifying phenomena, the North Atlantic Oscillation, which is probably some of you are familiar with. This is affecting the winter climate of Europe. It's caused by changes in the pressure gradient between the Icelandic low and the Caribbean high in the Atlantic region. And as you see on these slides, this change in the pressure influences the westerly winds and the rainfall in periods when NEO plus, North Atlantic positive oscillations take place. Northwestern Europe gets much higher rainfall in the winter, and this is usually associated by milder conditions here in the winter. Whereas in that case, the eastern part of Europe and the Mediterranean is usually much drier in the winter. As the opposite, when the negative oscillations take place, then these westerly winds are diverted to the south and bring precipitation, very wet winters to the Mediterranean area and also towards the Carpathians. Particularly the lower Danube area. So if we want to see how the climate has changed, one way to do that is to study speleothem records from the Carpathians. There are many along the Carpathians, but their interpretation is not straightforward. A lot of advance has been done on what is influencing their oxygen and carbon isotopic signal and the deuterium excess values. What you see here is an ice cave which accumulated over the last 11,000 years. This is coming from the Apusheni Mountains. And the study by Aurel Pershoy and his team found out that it's mainly recording the autumn temperature changes and also humidity changes in the cave. What we see in this record that around 5,000 years ago, so approximately 3000 BC, a very abrupt increase takes place in the accumulation rate of the ice. It increases, which was interpreted by this team as winter precipitation increase, or less melting back of the summer period because of summer precipitation decrease. But the more likely interpretation was the winter precipitation increase at that time. If we look at the oxygen isotope record from this cave, we see that it shows increase until about 5,200 years BP, and then there is a decrease, and this has been interpreted as a NEO signal, so showing a shift around this time from NEO-negative dominated climate system to NEO-positive dominated climate system. And we also see in the deuterium excess record that around 5,000 years, so which is broadly 3000 BC, there is a change in the rainfall source area, and this peaks around 4,700 years ago. So this also shows that there is some very big transformation in the rain source areas and the climatic system at that time. And on top of this, we have the 5.2 or 3.2 rapid climate change event. This has been studied quite recently in another cave. This is Ursilor Cave by Virgil Dragushin, where I think this is the record what Florin has shown. And where we see here the oxygen isotope record, and in this cave, monitoring has been done in the last 10 years, and by now, the researchers know that this cave oxygen isotope record is mainly recording winter temperature change. And what this record shows, basically in alignment with the increasing winter insolation, a gradual increase from about 6,000 to present, with oscillations on top of that. And if you look at this record, one of the strongest positive oscillation is between 5,600 and 200 years ago, suggesting warmer winters at that time, followed by a small-scale cooling. But why is this publication also very important for us? Looking at this very colorful picture, you can also see that it shows how the region behaves when we have oscillation in the East Atlantic Oscillation and Arctic Oscillation. So when the East Atlantic Oscillation and Arctic oscillations are in a positive mode, then this area, together with the steppic areas in the east, are usually warmer in the winter. But you also see this divide, which also runs through the Caucasus Mountains here, that the Mediterranean areas and the eastern part of southeastern Europe behaves quite differently. Either doesn't show a change, or it does show rather a decrease in winter temperatures. If we look at the precipitation values, we see that during periods with higher East Atlantic Oscillation and Arctic oscillations, again, this area either doesn't show any crucial change, but the Mediterranean area is showing a decrease in precipitation. And further to the west, there is a big increase. So it also shows that these climatic oscillations do not have the same expression in the south than in the north. And now moving towards Western Hungary. In Western Hungary, the largest lake is Lake Balaton. And since this lake extends back to 16,000 years ago, it has been formed about that time. This is one of the most important climatic archives which has been studied since a long time. But radiocarbon dating of its deposit has not been done until quite recently of the central basins, the deepest parts. And here you see a chemical record from this lake. And why I'm showing a chemical record here, along, again, an age scale which is calibrated BP, is because in this lake, biogenic carbonate precipitation takes place. And when we have increases in magnesium and calcium ratio, along with increases in the oxygen isotopes, which is shown here, those are indicating periods of low lake levels, high summer evaporation rates. And when we look at this record, we see that around 5,300, 5,500 years ago, there is a gradual increase in this magnesium-calcium ratio, which is also coupled with oxygen isotope increase. So this record suggests and I think at least in the Balaton area, the summers get warmer in this period, or the summer incoming water into the lake decreased seriously. So these are the two possible ways to interpret it. And when we get around 3,800, 4,000, we are already in a very deep lake phase when most of the clay fraction increases. It's all connected to the biogenic carbonate precipitation. And the onset of this lake level increase starts around 4,600, 4,700 years ago. So already in the third millennium. In this lake, bivalve shelves were studied in Copper Age sites in a sequence from the Boleras period, which is between 5,400, 5,300 in Cal BP, and from the classic Baden period. And this allows direct comparison of isotopic records. And what they find in this study is that here is the site Balaton-Keresztúr rétidülő, is that along with isotopic changes in the transitional period from the Boleras to the Baden, the carbon and oxygen isotope records are showing a cooling event, which coincides with this 5.3 event, and following that, a much warmer and drier classical Baden period. And along with these changes, the researchers also observed a shift in the position of the settlement. When there was this cooler period, the site moved up on the slope. So also confirming that the water level has also changed. So this minor fluctuation is also visible in this oxygen isotope record as a small decrease back to lower values. And we also see that it's generally occurring within the high oxygen isotope value interval, so within either a drier or lower summer precipitation interval. The pollen record from the same site records a strong occupation in the Baden period. What we see here is an increase in the Artemisia pollen percentages, a wormwood steppic plant that usually is associated with heavy grazing. And we also see that around 4,800, 4,600 cal BP, the late Copper Age Baden culture impact ceases, so it stops, suggesting that this area became, at least for some time, abandoned, and there is a strong increase in the forest vegetation. There is also an increase in one of the major forest components, apart from oak, beech, suggesting also in confirmation with, in alignment with the lake level data, that the summer precipitation increased in this area. And if you look at this time period, that broadly coincides with the mass movement of the Yamnaya from west, from east towards west. So at least in Western Hungary, we do see an increase, increasing available moisture at that time. Yeah, when we move to the east of the country, we only have pollen records and not oxygen isotope or isotopic records from the lowlands. But I tried to highlight with this red square the position of 5,300, 4,500 cal BP, so the Yamnaya, pre-Yamnaya and Yamnaya migration period. What this record shows is only a wetland meadow compositional change. What we see here is the umbelliferae pollen and Anthemis pollen. This is an oxbow lake, and this umbelliferae pollen likely came from the oxbow lake shore wetland area, suggesting that the plant community shifted at that time. It also shows, however, if you look at the arboreal pollen percentages, that slightly earlier than in Lake Balaton, the arboreal pollen values increase, and this is a tendency that is appearing in many other pollen records coming from Hungary, which suggest afforestation again around 4,800. It's getting wetter and in the area. What we also have now is the climate model data. The TRACE 21 climate modeling resulted in a series of, well, you can use this data, download it freely, and by plotting it, you can get climate model information at very, very high resolution. I'm just showing some example here. On the top left, we are around 2,900 BC, and in the right down, it's about 3,700 BC, and we see the winter minimum temperature changes at this time. There's also a video, but I'm not showing now. If someone is interested, we can have a look at it together. What it shows, however, here is how it looked like 6,600 years ago, so much earlier in the Holocene. And if you look at this, the long-term trend in this map series, is a warming in the winter, as is also suggested by the incoming winter solar radiation increase. So around 8,500 BP, it was generally much colder, both in the Carpathians and in Hungary as well. We also can have a look at the summer precipitation changes, and they do show an increase, a gradual long-term increase. For some reason, one map is not showing up here, but that would also show the situation at 8,500, which would be much drier at that time. And there is no major decline in the modeled values between 3,300 and 3,000 BC. This volcanic lake is in the Eastern Carpathians. Some of you may have already visited Lake St. Anna, the youngest volcanic crater. And since crater lakes are only fed by rainwater, the changes in the water level of this lake can also be used to infer hydrological changes throughout the Holocene. What this figure shows is the last 9,000 years in Cal BP again, and here starting around 5,700 and ending around 4,200, you see this, the rectangle again. And what we see on the basis of the phosphorus and the macrofossil inferred water level and the organic content changes in the lake is that the lake level started to increase around 5,500 years ago. There was a small drawback in the lake level, and then again increasing lake levels are indicated by the plant macrofossils here. In the early Holocene, until this point, until 6,000 years ago, this has been a peat bog. So that's a massive increase in available moisture at that time. So moving towards the east, if we look at the mid-Holocene climate change in the Pontic Steppe, I'm not going into the details of these slides, but what you have to observe here that in the Pontic Steppe region, there is a big biomass increase, first in the production of the steppe, and then a big decrease towards the south. So it's not a general increase towards the north. It's important to bear in mind. And in the Holocene, the extent of this steppe zone has fluctuated a lot in association with hydrological changes. Russian and, in this case, Ukraine scientists made this summary figure, it's Kotova et al., on the basis of available pollen records from this region, which show the extent of the forest steppe zone, the forest zone, here together, these two, the steppe zone and the semi-desert area along this transect. What we see for the Yamnaya and pre-Yamnaya period is the southward movement of the forest area. So if we can accept the time scale of this curve, which I'm not 100% sure, then this would suggest that in the pre-Yamnaya and Yamnaya period, the steppe peak zone has started to narrow down. That's what it shows. There are newer studies from this area. Willy Tinner and his team from Bern University, I think in connection with the EXPLO project, just recently published a paper, which is a evaluation, restudy of one of the important sites in the southern Pontic area. It's called the Kardashinsky Mire. So because this is a very dry area, it's very, very rare to find any sites where pollen analysis or any kind of isotopic analysis on sediments can be done. But the study, what they just published a few weeks ago, shows an early Holocene period where around 6,200 years ago, the pine population declined in the area, and this was associated with the expansion of steppe pig plants, Artemisia and Canopodiaceae. Also very important that they pointed out that this wetland has been covered by mesic trees until 4,100 BC, mainly oak, hazel, and elm. And if we look at the aquatic plant records, they are associating these peaks in aquatic plants with shallower water. They associate this interval with the Atlantic, much drier period. So this is about 4,100 years ago, the ending of this period. And by the time we get to the Yamnaya interval, around 5,000 pre-Yamnaya 300 years ago, we are in a wetter period in the lake. They interpreted that area as an increase in available moisture. However, if we look at the sediment stratigraphy, we do see a small period between 5,400 in BP and 4,900 when the lake level decreases. So calcareous gytja changes to peaty gytja. But overall, this is set in a period when the lake level has already increased. Now I'm not showing the details of these slides because I think I will run out of time, but we started to compile pollen-based climate reconstructions from this area. This is a work in progress, but what I can say that these are the Bulgarian reconstructions showing only July temperature and annual precipitation, that at the moment show a very divergent results, so not similar, very much depending on where we are. If we are in Romania, in mid-latitude, mid-altitude, then this is the time period of hornbeam dominance and Corylus decline. But you also see that already prior to the Yamnaya expansion it took place. The only thing I would like to say before I end the talk is that as we move east into the steppe area, we can only rely on paleopedological studies. And these paleopedological studies, in this case, coming from the Pontic steppe zone and the forest steppe zone also, you see the details on the map. This is the study of Russian scientists. They indicate that those kugans that have Chernozem soils in the bottom at these locations have become covered on the top by forest soils later. We do not know when this afforestation took place. We know that when the grazing took place by the nomadic holders, these were still Chernozem soils, so steppic soils. But this also shows that towards the later Holocene, there is available moisture increase in this area. And I also would like to show this reconstruction here, which we heard yesterday, that is as we move towards the Caucasus area, around 2,800 years ago, that's the time when the dental calculus indicates the first dire use of cattle. It has been associated in the study by the drying of the steppe. And the paleoclimate studies are coming from pollen-based reconstruction here from the Caucasus Mountains. And that's what you see here. This is the annual precipitation reconstruction, which does show a minor decrease here. But if you look at the tree-line elevation changes, that also shows a decrease, suggesting a major cooling there. So my interpretation of this is that there is much more study needed to be able to really say that there is a dry period there. The temperature decrease doesn't really fit with this interpretation. And I skip this slide and I just come to the conclusions. I think these are important, that at what I just presented now, you probably saw that some of the records are focusing more on the winter climate, some on the summer climate, and very few records can be used for hydrological reconstruction, which is the most important for the pastures. But we can say that generally, as we move west along this transect, the annual rainfall gets higher. And even though we have steppic vegetation in the Carpathian Basin, it's mainly edaphic steppe, the productivity of these pastures increases along this west transect along the Danube. So this was likely attractive for the Yamnaya. We do see that this 3.2, 3.5 rapid climate change event can be detected in several records. But water level decreases and drying is not consistent in this area. What we do see that at this time, warm temperate deciduous tree taxa decline, and a much more humid, requiring hornbeam and beech-dominated forest takes over. There are some places like Dobruja where there is deforestation, but that's human-induced. So overall, this is a time period of cooling summers and warming winters associated with strong fluctuations. But the proxy and climate data suggest that that about 2,900 years ago, there was rather an increasing moisture availability. Thank you very much.